Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us today for our Defining Your Leadership Purpose webinar with Shelley Pernot. My name is Amanda Golden, and I will be your moderator for today. And we are thrilled to have all of you with us for the next 60 minutes, with about 10 to 15 minutes reserved at the end for questions. So feel free to put those questions in the chat box as we go along, and we will have some time to answer those. Today's webinar features Shelley Pernot, a leadership coach and development expert with an impressive background. Shelley started her career with ExxonMobil and later launched her own risk management consultancy. She went on to serve as Global Capability Manager for Leadership Development at BP, where she designed programs that helped shape a culture of openness and transparency. Inspired by her work there, Shelley founded True North Coaching and Development in 2015 and has since led leadership training programs for top organizations like Dell, Shell, Unilever, and the VA. Shelley holds a BBA and MPA from the University of Texas at Austin, an MBA from Erasmus Rotterdam, and she's a CPA and professional certified coach through the International Coaching Federation. We are so lucky to have her with us today. So, Shelley, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Amanda. I really appreciate that. It's always so awesome to be with y'all, and super excited to be with all of you today, calling in from so many different places. And we're talking about leadership purpose. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and because it's so personal and unique to each one of us, and it's so important. And we'll come on to that in just a second, because I want today to be really interactive. And so, I'm a coach. I have a tendency to ask a lot of questions. So I'm going to be asking y'all a lot of questions, as we proceed through this topic. And let's just share the agenda in terms of what we're after today. So we're going to be talking a little bit about why leadership purpose matters so much. And then we're going to spend a little time looking at the anatomy of a purpose statement. What are some components of it? What does good look like in this space? And then we're going to enter a period of some guided self-reflection. And I'm going to give you all the opportunity to think about this through a few different lenses or perspectives. And we're going to do a few activities that are going to build on each other progressively. And at the end of the session, you're going to draft your statement, so your leadership purpose statement. And so you're going to leave with that today. And then we'll share our statements. We've got the chat functionality, so you'll be able to do that. And then I'll share a few final thoughts on that front, and then take any questions that you've got. So that's the goal and where we're headed. And so with that said, y'all tell me in the chat, why does having a leadership purpose statement matter so much? Why does being plugged into that have an impact? Why are we doing this? Yeah, so I'm starting to see some things coming in the chat. It helps you have a North Star. Yeah, I love that. I love that. My business is called True North, so very big on North Star. Guidance, giving direction, compass. Oh, I love all these references to the compass and the North Star. Yeah, motivation, sustainability. Ooh, I love that. That's a really interesting angle. It impacts those you're leading. It helps you to ground yourself. Yeah, we're actually going to do a grounding exercise before we get into some of the reflection. So I love that that's coming up in the chat. Sense of direction, communication. On hard days, it can help. Absolutely, Autumn. Because it's one of these things where, when we're kind of knocked off course, and maybe we don't have the answer, that we feel like we need to have, or maybe I'm really struggling to figure out, how do I navigate this difficult situation? This statement can really give me a sense of clarity. People need to know why you lead the way you do. Remembering your why when things get hard. Yeah, I mean, these are all great reasons that you're putting into the chat. And a lot of what you're saying in the chat is encapsulated here on this slide, in terms of some high level thinking on my side. Purpose aligns with your values. We want it to reflect who we are. so we can show up in an authentic way. And a lot of you were talking about motivation. Having a purpose statement is really motivating, for oneself as a leader, and it can also really inspire and energize your team. So there's that motivational aspect that I think is so important. And then to the point about, giving guidance when things are difficult, through periods of uncertainty, when things get hard, to your point, Catherine, in the chat. And last but not least, it builds authentic leadership presence. A lot of people come to me for coaching on, how can I cultivate more executive presence? How can I cultivate more leadership presence? So it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment. And when you think about that, a lot of it starts with being who we are. And we might have a purpose or an intention for a project or something that we're doing. So it makes sense that we would be purposeful about our leadership and intentional about it, because our behavior follows on from our attention. Mindset is always upstream of behavior. And that's something I say a lot as a leadership coach. Mindset is upstream of behavior. So it makes sense that we spend a little time thinking about, what do I really want to achieve? What's my intention here? Because I often think about the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, and I don't know if any of y'all have ever heard the story of Alice in Wonderland, but she's wandering through at some point and she's lost, and she meets the Cheshire Cat, and she's asking which way she should go, and the Cheshire Cat says, "Well, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there." So I think it behooves us to be really intentional about our leadership, and it builds executive presence and leadership presence. So a lot of really great reasons to do this. And I've already been alluding to this, and y'all have also been alluding to this in the chat. It is your North Star. And it's more than just a job description. It's a statement that speaks to the impact that you really want to make at the end of the day. And I love this quote here from Mark Twain. The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. So let this be a bit of inspiration for us as we start to progress on this journey of building this leadership purpose statement. And in order to do that, I'll share with y'all some common elements of a leadership purpose statement that I've noticed over the years. Often there's values included in this leadership purpose statement, or it can be helpful thinking about your values. And so we're going to do a little work around that to get y'all thinking about your values. They're often aimed at service to others. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, but quite often one of the things that I notice, in terms of commonalities, is often they are service oriented, maybe servant leader oriented. They're authentic, personal. So this isn't something that you pop into Chat GPT. And it's, write me a leadership purpose statement. It needs to be personal to you. AI can help us enhance it maybe, but we really want this to come from ourselves. Forward looking. Quite often these statements are forward looking in terms of what we want to create or what we want to bring into the world. And last but not least, concise and inspiring. So you need to be able to remember it. That's helpful. So we don't want it to be too long, and something that really hits you here. It's not just about your head. This whole journey of leadership purpose statement is really about connecting the head to the heart. And that's often the shortest journey we take in life, but it's often the longest one, is from the head to the heart. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on today, and it's a key aspect of it. So, in order to get us really centered and grounded for this work that we're about to do, we're going to do a grounding exercise. So a lot of you are probably, rocking up to this webinar, and maybe you've been in meetings all day. Maybe you're just coming out of one. Maybe you're tired or you're distracted. There's probably a million things that are going on for y'all right now. And it really is helpful to feel connected and grounded when you're doing this work because you get a much better outcome. So we're going to do something called the wheel of awareness. And I use this a lot with leaders who come to me for coaching, and it's a way of centering oneself. And you can use this at any point during your day. And I recommend it particularly if you're feeling really overwhelmed, or maybe even a little bit out of control, or you're just not feeling centered, you're super distracted. It's a way of bringing yourself back to conscious presence. And it's also really helpful in terms of our physiology because tools like the wheel of awareness are super helpful in calming a stress reaction in the moment. So often when leaders come to me, wanting to work on leadership presence or executive presence, this is one of the tools we'll utilize is something like the wheel of awareness. You can do a short version of this, maybe 3 or 4 minutes before an important meeting or presentation. Maybe you're feeling a little bit nervous, like I was this morning, because we all get nervous, right? So let's do this together, but take a moment to get comfortable. Ensure that all your notifications are switched off and your phone's on silent. So just take a moment to do that. Close out of your email. It's important you're not disturbed for the next few minutes. And now just notice how you're breathing. Focus on your breathing for a second. Take 1 or 2 deeper breaths and just allow your breath to settle. Now, I want you to take your eyes for a walk around your space right now and focus on an object that's pleasurable to look at. Just tune into it for a second. What do you notice? Maybe you notice how it shines with the sunlight hitting it. Maybe you're noticing the colors. Now go ahead and close your eyes down. And I invite you to connect with your hearing. Notice what you can hear. Could be other sounds, like maybe the hum of the air conditioner or a bird chirping outside. You might even hear your own breath. Without judgment, just notice what you can hear. Now take your sense of awareness to your sense of taste. And notice what you can taste right now. Maybe it's that last cup of coffee or something else. Now take your awareness to your sense of smell. What can you smell right now? What subtle smells are you aware of in this moment? Now take your awareness to your hands and skin and notice what you can feel or touch. Maybe it's a sensation of clothing on your skin, your sitting bones on your chair, or maybe your feet on the floor. Now move your self-awareness to how you're feeling today. What feelings do you notice right now? What's the single word that captures how you feel? Maybe you're feeling calm, energized, grateful, or maybe anxious, agitated, uneasy, or something else. Whatever it is, it's human. Just notice what you're feeling and breathe into it without judgment of the emotion or yourself. Now turn your attention to your thoughts. What thoughts are moving through your mind right now? Maybe you're distracted. Maybe you're thinking about your to-do list or the meeting you just came out of. It's okay, no judgments. Just notice. Just notice these thoughts and how they come in and out of your awareness like clouds passing through the sky. And from this place of deeper awareness now, allow a word or image to appear that describes how you want to show up today, for the rest of this session. Just let it come. No need to edit it. Now, when you're ready, reconnect with your breath. Feel your feet on the floor. Have a stretch. Open your eyes. And pop that word into the chat. How do you want to show up? Yoda. Intentional, relaxed. Yeah. Yeah. How was that, by the way? What was that experience like just now? That was a quick will of awareness. Calming. Yeah. It was calming. I should do that more often in my day. We should all do it more often in our day. Yeah, so that's a tool, that you can utilize. And it's super helpful and effective in just bringing us into a more grounded place so we can really focus and get intentional about what we're going to do. Yeah, I love this. I love what's coming up in the chat. So now that we've gotten ourselves more centered and grounded, let's start building up this leadership purpose statement. So the first question, the high level question that we're really driving at here is, what are my top 3 to 4 values? So if you've got a piece of scratch paper, or maybe you're taking notes in Microsoft Word, or however you want to do it, just start doing some journaling. And so for the next 2 or 3 minutes, we're going to be focusing on this particular question. And it may be that there are certain values that come up for you straight away. Like, I know that integrity is really important for me. This is one of my personal values. I've already done some work in this space, so that's one I could speak to, pretty articulately. But maybe you haven't thought about this before, so it might be helpful to think about a moment that you felt proud as a leader. That might be one way of tapping into some values. What were you doing? Who benefited? Maybe it was a situation where you had to have a difficult conversation, and you showed up and you had the conversation, and you made sure that the person was clear about what needed to happen, but you were also compassionate. So maybe compassionate is something you value, or maybe it's accuracy, or maybe it's faith, or maybe it's spirituality, or maybe it's trust. So there's a few prompts on the slide just to get you noodling on this. But ultimately, what I'm looking for, and feel free to start putting these into the chat. But what are values that really resonate with you? And I'm looking for about 3 to 4 values for each person. All right. So honesty, empathy, inclusivity, success in my employees. Yeah. How would you turn that into a value, Christy? Let's see. Respect, empathy. A lot of things coming up in the chat. It's beautiful. Yeah. Honesty, humility, effectiveness. Transparency is a big one for me. Yeah. Kindness, compassion. So there's no right or wrong. And, again, maybe you've thought about this over the years, or maybe you haven't at all. But the thing is, we all have values. And the question is, how conscious are we, of the values that are ultimately running our lives? Because we are committed to these things, whether we realize it or not. Yeah, loving all this. Okay. And definitely keep it coming in the chat. So I'm gonna move on to the next aspect of this because it seems like the wheels are pretty greased and y'all are coming up with lots of great stuff here. So values is one component of this. So now a slightly different prompt. What are my strengths and passions? And I want to start with just this first question here. What are my superpowers and strengths? So think about some of the feedback that maybe you've gotten over the years. Think about, um, how would you describe yourself as far as your top strengths are concerned? So let's just start with that. What are you really good at? One of the things that I've been told over the years, and this makes a lot of sense, considering I now do a lot of training, facilitation, coaching. But I'm really good at taking complicated things and distilling them into simple things that people can understand and embrace. And that's a gift and a skill that I have. And it's served me really well, particularly when I started leaning more into it. And I'm loving all this in the chat. Listening, creativity. Yeah, okay, detail oriented. That's great to know about yourself. Trustworthiness. Oh, I love that. Yeah, future thinker, EQ. Yeah. Yeah. So, what are my superpowers and strengths? Leadership with compassion. Very nice. Yeah. Keep that coming into the chat. What are my superpowers and strengths? And it's interesting to think about this because, sometimes we have a tendency to discount our superpowers and our strengths because they come easy to us. So I do a fair amount of public speaking, obviously, in what I do, and I've had to work on it over the years, but at the same time, there's aspects of it that come easy to me. So I tend to discount it a little bit, but those things that come easy to us, they're often our superpowers and our strengths. We shouldn't discount them. It's a gift that we have. So I love all the action in the chat again. So now I want to flip over to this third question here. What ignites your passion? What do you love? What ignites your passion? My team. What is it about your team? Get more specific there. Okay, helping others. Helping how? I'm going to ask you all to get more specific with some of these. Yeah, and I'm loving all this. Yeah, seeing others have aha moments. Ah, yeah, me too. I think that's what motivates me so much in terms of what I do as a coach and facilitator. Being close to the learning, where you can actually see those moments. That's really driven me through my career. Others being successful, desired outcomes come true, wanting to be the person I wish I had growing up. Ooh, that's powerful. It's really powerful. Achieving a goal. Yeah. What kinds of goals, are you most passionate about? So challenge yourself to get even a little bit more specific about these things. one of the things I often think about is what are the things that send me into flow state? So I'm in flow state right now with y'all. It's a place that I go to a lot when I'm facilitating or training because I enjoy it so much that I get into this state of flow where time just passes and I'm not even aware of it, although I'm still looking at the clock. Because I know I can't go over time, but it's when time just you look down and it's like an hour has passed. So that's one way of thinking about this as well. Yeah, seeing someone embrace my idea as their own. Oh, wow, wow, Allison. What an altruistic way to think about the value that we bring. I just love that. Providing leadership for those once I'm retired. Yeah, so what can I do to set up the next group of people for success who are going to come after me? These are such incredible shares in the chat. I'm loving all this. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and curb that now. So we've got the creative juices flowing. We've been thinking about our values. We've been thinking about our superpowers and strengths and what really ignites our passion. And now it's time to put it all together. And Colleen, I hear that. And I want to just address what you put into the chat because I have a feeling that other people might be feeling that same way too. I feel like I have a bit of a disconnect between my job and my passion. I love helping students discover their own passion. My job doesn't always allow me to step into that. Yeah, yeah. And so, there may be aspects, of things that ignite our passion. But at the same time, it might be hard to turn that into a job. And that's okay. I think the key with this is to ask ourselves these questions, to find where the intersections are, and to think about, well, what would make me, a little bit more passionate at work? Maybe it's having the opportunity to connect more deeply with folks. And maybe that's something that I want to aim for because I really value connection and I'm a great communicator. And maybe that's what I want my purpose statement to focus on is, how I can use my gift of communication to help others. So don't let the fact that, maybe I have a passion and I can't necessarily translate that into a job hold you back with this. I want you to think about as many angles as possible for how we can make the work that we do more meaningful and purposeful. That's ultimately the point of this. And I really appreciate you putting that into the chat because I think a lot of people, might have been thinking that too. All right. So we're going to move into a final reflection, and you're going to go ahead and write your first draft of your leadership purpose statement. And I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do this as part of this webinar, maybe 6 or 7 minutes to actually do some reflection and to write your first draft. And I often call that the crappy first draft. So I don't want you to feel restrained with this. Just get something down on paper or in Word, however you're doing this. It doesn't matter if it doesn't sound perfect, because I'm a recovering perfectionist. So sometimes that holds me back, from getting something out. Um, so let me just walk through what's on this slide, and then I'm gonna give y'all about 6 or 7 minutes to do some journaling, and then you're gonna share your leadership purpose statement in the chat. All right, so a few final reflection questions here. What goals and aspirations do I have for my leadership? Maybe you've gotten some feedback, maybe you've taken a 360, and there's some things you're working on. Think about your values for this, think about your strengths, think about things you want to improve. So what goals and aspirations do I have for my leadership? How do I want others to experience me as a leader? What do you want people to say about you as a leader? That maybe you were trustworthy or that you led with compassion or, what do you want people to say? And then what will I see happen if I live these goals? So those are some reflection questions that I want you to spend a little bit of time thinking about, and then create your statement. So there's a few examples of what that could look like on the slide here. Maybe it's I want to lead my team to innovate and tackle the challenges of AI by showing up as a leader full of curiosity. In doing so, I'll bring out the best in my team and inspire them to take risks and pursue creative solutions. That's one that a leader that I was working with shared with me. And then my purpose statement is there actually at the bottom. My purpose is to help myself and others tap into inner authority as leaders. To recognize, feel, and know one's worthiness, one's true spirit. I believe that when we're grounded in this knowledge, we can show up to live and lead with compassion, confidence, and clarity that inspires ourselves and others to bring their best. All right. So I'm going to go silent for a little bit, and I'm actually going to put on a little bit of music, and this will be about 6 or 7 minutes, give you the opportunity just to get something down on paper and do some journaling on this. And once you've got it, put it into the chat. About 3 more minutes, and I'm starting to see some things coming into the chat. once you've put yours, feel free to just sit back and read what else is coming in. You might get some ideas. About one more minute. All right. And I'm really inspired by all these statements coming into the chat, and they've been coming in so quickly, that I can't even read all of them. And I've been trying to read as many as I possibly can. It's incredible, and so you might find too, this is a great opportunity just to sit back as well and read some of the things that your colleagues, on this webinar are putting into their statements. I'm a big fan of borrowing from others. So, so you might hear something or see something and think, oh gosh, I'm going to put that in my statement too. Wow. Yeah, these are fantastic. Yeah, they keep coming and keep coming. One of the things that I've done, I've actually got mine right up here, actually on the wall. And I've typed it up and printed it out, and I have it in a place where I can see it, front and center every day. And I find it to be particularly helpful on days when things don't go as I want them to. Yeah, and they just keep coming. This is fantastic. So I encourage you, um, to keep working on these, to keep working on these. Can we get a copy of the chat? That's a great question. And I'll defer that to Amanda, who's helping out in the background, and she can let y'all know. But I think that would be fantastic, if we could get a copy of the chat, as an opportunity just to leverage in mind what else is coming up. So as now that you've hopefully got your leadership purpose statement, or maybe you've got the bones of it, there's a few, questions, to think about in terms of refining it, reframing it. Is it true to your lived experience? Does it really resonate? Is it bold and forward looking? You might ask yourself that question. And great. Amanda's saying, I will look to see if I can save the chat somewhere and make it accessible to attendees. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, that's fantastic. Is it clear and memorable? Because it's helpful to the extent that it's fairly succinct, you can remember it. or at least remember some of the elements of it? And does it resonate with your head and your heart? So I think from my perspective, I think this is one of the most important criteria, is thinking about whether or not it resonates with the head and the heart, because it's got to be both. But when we think about a purpose statement and the fact that, it inspires and motivates us in so many different ways, there's got to be that emotional component to it. So you may think about and just reflect, on what you've written, through these lenses, and there might be something that you want to tweak, as a result of asking yourself these questions. And getting it down is one thing. It's a really important exercise, and I always call it the crappy first draft, because we're going to be revising it. We're going to be revisiting it from time to time. Think about how you can embed this leadership purpose statement into how you lead every day. And I'll come on to that. Well, I'll come on to it now, actually. You might share it with your team. You might share it with them and ask them, is this how you see me? What do you notice in terms of how I show up with all of you? And get some feedback on that front, because they might have some interesting feedback that could help you recognize, where I'm hitting this, and maybe where there's some gaps. But thinking about opportunities to embed it, I think is going to be really important. Um, it's an important lens for decision making. I often think about, things cross my path all the time as a coach and consultant. People ask me to do different things. People want me to take on different projects. I go back to my leadership purpose statement and I think about, is this really going to give me the opportunity to live this, and to live this in a impactful way? And if I think it is, then it's probably something I will consider taking on. And if it's not, it's probably something that I'll discard. So use it as a lens for your decision making. Am I showing it this way? Am I living my values? If I were to really live my values in this moment, what would that mean? Yeah, yeah. And revisit and revise it as you grow. Because what you've written now, may not be the same 2 or 3 years from now. We change, we grow. Yeah. So I think this is really a living statement, and it's something that we come back to over and over again. Let's see. And I'm seeing some things coming in the chat. Yeah, so Colleen is asking, what's the difference between putting in once versus don't once in a statement? I don't want to be backwards looking. Yeah, that's an interesting question. And so I tend, as far as the statement's concerned, the way my thinking works with this is it's more powerful to think about what you want and what you don't want. And so I would tend to phrase it, through the lens of what you want to happen versus what you don't want to happen. Because anytime we focus on a negative, it tends to manifest it somehow. So language is powerful. And I think, framing things in a positive way where we're focused on what we want as opposed to don't want is probably going to set you up more for success. And hopefully I answered that question. I don't think you guys have audio, so I can't clarify that. So Colleen, let me know in the chat whether or not that answers your question. And then let's see, what's the best way to find leadership purpose and validate the same? Okay, so it did answer your question, Colleen. Punit, can you give a little bit more detail as to what you're looking for there? Um, I'm not exactly sure what that question means. So we've been walking through a process, for thinking about leadership purpose. So we've been thinking about our values and our strengths and our passion, and then those final reflection questions were a way of thinking about how do I want to put this, into a statement that applies to my leadership. But ultimately, it's got to come from you. How do you want to show up in the world, and how do you want to be perceived as a leader, by the people that you lead? So hopefully I'm answering that, because I'm not super clear what the question was. If you want to clarify that in the chat. But I appreciate you asking. Um, so just a few more thoughts, before we open it up for more questions and we close out. Um, Being purposeful about our leadership, it moves us out of the reactive into what I often call flow state. And so I do a lot of work with leaders on emotional intelligence, on triggers, and we can often, show up through a lens of reactivity. We're stressed. Maybe we're not having a very good day. Maybe we're worried about something. And quite often, there's a lot of internal self-talk that we're all subjected to because we're human beings. And so there's a lot of self-talk that our minds will make. And it often says things like, you're not good enough, or you don't know enough to be leading this team, or maybe it says things like you're an imposter, or you're not capable enough. Our internal noise or garbage is often telling us a lot of things. And so it's real easy to get into these fear states of fight or flight, when we're leading, and if I get activated or triggered as a leader, maybe that shows up as me being overly micromanaging with my team. And so when we can pull ourselves back from that, and focus more on purpose, like what's my purpose in this moment versus what's the negative self-talk, that's really, really powerful because it can move us out of reactivity into more of a place of growth mindset and flow state. So I really encourage y'all to have these purpose statements maybe in your phone, maybe print it out in places you can see them. And particularly when you're in a place where you're experiencing a lot of reactivity, go back and focus on your purpose statement and see what happens. See what happens in terms of your level of reactivity. It will probably shift. It's a really, really powerful exercise to do. So, I wanted to make sure that I underscore that because I think that's a really important point, that when we're leading from purpose, we get out of judgment of self and judgment of others, and we can come from a much more inspiring place. And, that's helpful in managing our own reactivity. Um, and you get to decide the kind of leader you want to be. Only I can choose how I live my life. And so, when we're intentional about these things, it just sets us up for success. And again, this is a living tool, not a fixed tagline. So a few final thoughts there, and a few next steps and resources that might be helpful along the way. Spend some time in reflection, maybe on a monthly basis. How am I living this purpose statement? Like, what have I noticed? How is it showing up for me? What adjustments do I need to make to live more in alignment? But carve out some time for some reflection. As leaders, it's hard to do that, but it's really important in terms of your ongoing development and journey that you make time for reflection, because we need space in order to reflect. So find some time for that and spend some time reflecting on that statement. Share your purpose with a mentor, or your team or your team. Get some feedback from them. How am I showing up? Am I really living this? And a couple of suggested readings there. You can start with Why by Simon Sinek, and then my book, Running on Empty, is geared at being more purposeful in the work that you do. So I'm going to stop there. And I'm also seeing more questions coming in. And so, Amanda, I'll invite you to come back on if there's some questions you want to bring to the group.
Yeah, we do have a few additional questions coming in. Our first one is, how can someone discover their true leadership purpose without being swayed by external influences?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, that's a great question. And I mean, to a certain extent, I think we're all swayed a little bit by external influences. I mean, we're all in this thing called life together. where we have mentors, we have parents, we have siblings. There's things our teachers have told us, that we, store back in the recesses of our mind. So we're always being influenced, I think, by other people and the experiences that we have. I would invite folks to really check in with the purpose in a few different ways. So I mentioned before the head, like, does this make sense? Is this rational? Does this connect to the goals and aspirations that the team has? That might be a way of checking in with the head. Check
Mhm.
in with the heart. Like, how do I feel about this? Do I get excited, when I hear this purpose statement? Does my heart skip a beat? Do I feel like the electricity, like the hair standing up in my arm? And
Mhm.
check in with your gut. So that's another form of intelligence. Head, heart, and gut. What does your gut say? We all have this internal guide, that lives within us, and I think checking in with those three different aspects can be a way of ascertaining whether or not it's quote unquote right for you. So that's what I would say to that.
That's great. Um, and then there's a question about how to gauge when it might be a good time to share your leadership statement with others. And the question was centered more around a nonprofit organization, but I also think that this could apply more broadly to other industry areas. How does one gauge when to share this very personal statement that they've developed for themselves with others?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know that I've ever thought about like a precise time for that. Um, I would ask that individual, what would need to be happening, or in the organization for it to be a good time. Um,
Mhm.
one of the things I often tell coaching clients is it's okay to share with your team that you're working on your leadership. And so maybe what you could do is frame it as, I'm working on my leadership, and I'm really committed to my growth. And I want to share this with y'all, through the lens of transparency, and get feedback from y'all in terms of how well I'm doing on that front. But only you, I think, ultimately know when is the right time. I think sometimes it can be helpful to frame it a little bit, and through the lens of learning and development. And when you can do that, it also gives space for other people, to ask for input and feedback as well, because you've just signaled as a leader, I'm working on my development. I'm open to learning. There's a little bit of vulnerability there, but practicing vulnerability is what sets the stage for psychological safety. And so we all want to improve psychological safety with our teams. And there's actually a course for that. It's CPE as well. So which I teach.
Love the plug.
So yeah, yeah. So I encourage you to lean into that. And if it's all right, I might share in the chat as well, my website,
Yes.
because I blog a lot on these topics, and I encourage y'all to jump on and to maybe sign up. And I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And thank you so much, Shelley, for such a great session. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. As Shelley mentioned, we do have a lot of classes offered through the Center of Professional Education, not only on this topic, but a wide range of other topics. So please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to explore those opportunities more. And I just hope everyone goes back into their day feeling as energized as I do from having sat in on this session. Shelley, is there anything else you'd like to add before we conclude?
No, no, I hope to see y'all again soon on a course. And in the meantime, good luck with your leadership purpose statements, and with living them.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Thank you so much to all of our attendees. Have a great rest of your day.